So lately a word has been popping up out of the background and grabbing my attention. And that word is trans. Like in transaction, exchanging money in our ever commercial world, or trans-Pacific, going to Japan and back, or transition, the word that transgender people use to describe the movement they've made in their lives. There are also more churchy words that people like me like to use, transcendence, or my personal favorite, transformation. The word comes from a Latin root, meaning translated usually as a cross, but implied in the word is a sense of movement. So that perhaps more accurately we could say trans is moving across. So to stay with me today as we transit and move across to some interesting connections. We've been stepping through a Faith Clinic series called Change the World by Ohio pastor Mike Slaughter. He's a Methodist pastor in a very large congregation in rural Dayton, the rural Dayton, Ohio area. And he challenges us to follow the way of Jesus, become a way of Jesus, become a disciple of Jesus by responding to that commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. So we've investigated, as we've gone through this, who is our neighbor? By exploring the image of the Good Samaritan, where we learn that our neighbor is anyone who is in need, whether we know them or not, whether we even like them or not. 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people considered Samaritans to be heretics. Yet Jesus raised up the Samaritans as a model of mercy. This parable story is really the root of our radical inclusionary attitude, why everyone is welcome in God's church. We then began to look in different ways how we might help our neighbors, whoever they were. So we started by looking at travelers, whether they're homeless people who have migrated to our area or immigrants from another country. Or maybe they've come to the university to study or to teach or to visit for the summer. And California is really different from back home. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I spent my summers in New York City. And it was such a very, very different context for me. I learned that I was a Californian by being in New York. And I would have been great if I had had a little bit more support in learning how to maneuver through that very, very different culture. So we are called to help our travelers when they come here to be welcome and wherever they come from. We looked at people who are hungry. It's a sad story that a rich country like ours throws away so much food that it still has people who can't afford to eat today. I volunteer at a meal program that this circuit supports, and I've come to see month after month a lot of the same faces, and it really speaks to a structural issue that people just do not need a free meal in their lives just to get through that day, that week. This is a very sad situation. Today we begin to look at another constant need, perhaps an even deeper need, and that's healing. We live in a broken world. Each of us in some way is broken ourselves. We all need healing. Everybody needs healing. Pastor Slaughter, in his book, talks about the kind of practical side of maintaining good health and structural health care systems, delivering health care needs around the world. But I'm going to talk today more about the spiritual side of healing that we all have. We all experience the death of someone close to us. Or many of us have had intense breakups or divorces in our emotional lives. Or the betrayal or sudden disappearance of a close friend. Or a major split with a parent or a child or a sibling. Or the loss of a job or a forced career change. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these things happening at the same time. All of these kinds of experiences can twist us or crack us, sometimes causing intense suffering, sometimes sending us into depression and despair. Healing was core in the gospel stories of Jesus' ministry. The gospel that we heard today from Mark was of his miracles and healings, miracles and healings of helping mute people to be able to talk, blind people to be able to see. These established in his time that he was coming from God. And as we've talked about many times, what Jesus preached, that is what he said, was about the wondrous world of God just available to us right now, right around the corner. And what he did was to show what that world would look like. That is, the blind can see, the mute can speak, demons will be driven from the world. Now, he meant this literally, and he meant it metaphorically. Both of these together. There was a literal side and a metaphorical side. So imagine if we all had clear sight, able to see the world for the wondrous place that it is, that all we could hear in the breeze was the sound of God, and everything we tasted was divine. What a world that would be. What that would be a transformation. My favorite word. Jesus said we need to repent, which means to turn around, to transform your life by walking down his path, not the world's path. So salvation or healing comes from transforming our lives into following Jesus. But Mike Slaughter reminds us that this is more than an interpersonal change. Following Jesus means following his commandment to love our neighbor and to change the world. There's a phrase that's become quite popular in the Jewish community for the last 50 years or so, although it goes back a couple of thousand years. Tikkun olam. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. To repair, or to heal, to fix the world. So what does that healing change look like? Well, 15 years ago, when I became a member of this congregation, almost none of the members at that time knew that I was in the midst of a major 3-year career crisis that was spilling over disastrously into the rest of my life. Probably the deepest depression I've ever experienced. It never occurred to me at that time to bring that myself in that way to church. I visited here once a week. People were friendly. I had a good time. I felt I was in community, but that wasn't anything I would share with them. But today, many, if not most of you, are connecting to the church community in much deeper ways. We have the faith clinics, the home Bible study groups, the United Methodist Women's Group, the men's group, the Walk to Emmaus Fourth Day group, the congregational care ministers, the choir. In each of these small groups, lives are shared and faith is deepened. If God forbid I find myself in another depression, this time I know the church is where I would turn. This is good news indeed. However, I'm going to take us up a notch today. At annual conference last week, we were asked by our keynote speaker, the Reverend Alexis Salvatierra, a couple of very important questions that I'm going to repeat here. First, as people of faith, what's going on in the world that breaks your heart? Not what makes you mad or upset, but what just hurts to think about. I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbors here in the pews this morning, say in groups of 3 or 4, and share with each other what it is that is out there breaking your heart. I'll give you about 5 minutes and ask you to report back. I'd like to ask the ushers to be available so that if anyone actually, I'll ask it this way. It's not something that you said. Don't repeat what you said. What did you hear? What did somebody say to you in your group that really touched you about what's happening out in the world? All right? Yeah.
Well, Lindsay talked about what is either an uptick in inappropriate police action, or maybe the fact that it can be documented so much more easily on social media, that idea of police acting in ways that they're not protecting, they're not serving, but they're acting in different ways.
With our discussion, Lucy brought up when she felt very helpless with all the death that's been coming about lately. We see in the news all the time innocents that are often affected, and how limited we as human beings are in terms of being able to assist all these different people in stress.
A couple more.
We have discussed a couple of things. One is the violence, and I'm sure many of you might have talked about it. But the other one, which is like a breath of fresh air, is what Luke mentioned. He mentioned about the wastage that he sees around, which will bother him a lot. Many people waste a lot of stuff, and
All right, one more, right here.
I was sharing with these two ladies here, and I think what hurt me the most, and also the rest of the world, the honesty. When people are not honest, individual, large, and also in politics and religion.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to ask you to use your imaginations and turn that around. Go to that place where it hurts and imagine that it was the opposite. You know, that whatever was touching you and was ever so painful, what would the world look like if that were gone? And describe to each other, go back to your groups, describe to each other, just what would the world look like if that pain, that hurt was gone? What would it be? Question. So let me ask, this is a tough question. The group I joined had a very hard time trying to imagine what it would be like. I kept thinking of something new, another problem that would pop up. Once we dealt with this, then this other thing comes up. So I'm curious as to what happened out there in your groups. What imagination, what positive world were you able to imagine and describe? We must have some hopeful people here. There we go. Listen.
Our group is very dreamers, but that is what we are asked to do. And our main dream is go back to Eden, to that garden where lions and lamb can play together or talk together. But a key word that came out was that hope. And us is that we hope that every little thing we do with a lot of little things will work out at the end to change the world.
Someone else? Where was the hope elsewhere in the room? Right here.
Is the speaker? But anyway, we were talking about, I did mention the God's virtues. And it's human that we have the most precious gifts from God ever given any kingdom, but mankind, the brain. So we have the brain, we have the heart, and we have the soul. So I think we have to connect all that with this word of last people about life.
One more. So, any other questions?
Well, we were talking about attaining peace. If most of us wouldn't keep wanting more, better homes, better cars, more clothes, you know, a lot of things that we may not necessarily need, then we'd be more contented. Life would be more peaceful for each individual, and I think maybe that's the way to go.
Okay, I'm going to ask the hardest question of all.
Oh, jeez.
So what is it that we can do now, this week, to take the smallest, tiniest, little step towards that wondrous world that you imagine? Now, we don't have time to do it in our small groups today, so I'm going to suggest that you ponder that, take that back to the small groups that you're part of. If you're not part of a small group or you're visiting here today, I'm going to ask the Walk to Emmaus pilgrims to hang out here in the sanctuary after service, and you can share it with them. Because what is it that we can do this week, now, today, that can bring peace in the world? Or, as this group talked about, deal with homelessness on the streets. What can we do this week? Small. Not going to change it this week, but we can take a step. And if we take one step, we can take a second step. We can take a third step. But we're never going to get to the third step or the 30th step unless we take the first one. So what can we do this week? Let us pray. Thank you, dear God, for the opportunity to come and hear your word, hear about the healing that you brought to the world. May we receive your spirit and enable it to move us just a little bit toward the world that you are calling us to, the world of God, the kingdom of God, this week or this afternoon. We do this in your name.